Okay, let's go.
All righty, good morning. So my name's Tim Hutchinson. I am the Broomfield County Veteran Service Officer. So I work for the county of Broomfield. I don't work for the VA. So as such, I represent the veteran or the veteran's family in matters with the VA. So I'm an advocate for, for the veteran or the veteran's family. So that's a good thing to know, because a lot of times it's confused. They're like, well, people come in and they're like, well, you work for the VA. And I'm like, well, no, I don't. But it's understandable why people would think that sometimes. So first of all, I want to let you know I break all the rules. My slides have way too much information on them, and I say a lot. In fact, my wife's at home watching right now, and I get 3 free ums. After that, she shocks me. I have this harness on. So, see, she just did it. All right, so the reason why I really have these, all this up here is just to keep me on track and give you the best information that's as current as possible. Most of the information I'm going to go over today can be found at va.gov at the website. Now they have a great website with a lot of great information. You might have to drill down to find what you're looking for, but use that search bar, search specifically what you're looking for, and you'll find some great information. Most all of this comes from the website. So the PACT Act, as you all know, was passed in August of last year, signed into law, and the whole premise behind the act is to really take care of our veterans for the toxic types of exposures they may have been exposed to, right? So it brings about a lot of changes, expands and extends the eligibility for VA health care for veterans with toxic exposures and veterans in Vietnam, Gulf War, and post 9/11 eras. It adds more than 20 new presumptive conditions for burn pits and other toxic exposures, which is very important, very good and important piece of legislation that really addresses a lot of issues that I think should have been addressed maybe a lot earlier, but they're heading in the right direction. And it adds more presumptive exposure locations for Agent Orange and radiation. And the VA is required to provide a toxic screening exposure screening to every veteran enrolled in VA healthcare. And, it helps them improve research, education, training to, related to toxic exposures. So, what is a presumptive condition? So a presumptive condition is one that the VA will presume that is related to your military service, due to you being in an area that may have had toxic exposures, or being, around certain exposures, burn pits, those types of things, right? So what you need is a current diagnosis of a condition that is considered related to those exposures, and proof of the service location, which the VA can usually get that through your service records, through the archives and whatnot, right? So a lot of times that's been a challenge. Sometimes people have been attached to squadrons, different things, and flew into places like Thailand or Vietnam, and there's no record of it. I know it gets frustrating at that point, but all we can do is file for it, let the VA come back with a decision, and everybody has due process at that point. So if you're able to prove it, letters from home, to home, something of that nature that can prove where you were at during a specific time frame, that can be used as well. The VA will provide a C&P exam to determine the severity of the condition and then make a decision. The C&P stands for compensation and pension. So those are examinations that are done. The VA normally outsources them to contractors that perform those. It could be anywhere in the metro area. Sometimes they want people to go to Wyoming, I don't know. They do the best they can, but sometimes if it's a little out of the way, you have to call them back and say, I need something closer. But they do try to get it fairly locally, but it's just who answers that first, so whoever says, okay, we'll do the exam, as the VA puts it out there, And that's really how that works. So Vietnam, we'll start with Vietnam. Agent Orange, everyone knows, a tactical herbicide. The U.S. military used to clear leaves and vegetation. And back then, they probably told everyone it was harmless. Okay? So the current presumptives for Agent Orange, okay? There's a lot of conditions here that are associated with exposure to Agent Orange. So, if you have one of these conditions and you were in Vietnam, then they were granting these, right? So saying, okay, you were in Vietnam, you have one of these conditions, we'll grant your claim, right? It took a while for this to come about, but that's the way the law was before the PACT Act, right? Those were the current presumptives prior to the PACT Act. The new presumptives were added as hypertension, which is high blood pressure, and then MGUS, which is a abnormal protein that gets into the bone marrow and creates issues, right? So those two things, and if people ask what MGUS is, then you probably don't have it. So, but those two were added due to the PACT Act. The hypothyroidism and bladder cancer were added previously, but maybe a year prior or so, they add those presumptives. So the one thing with the presumptive conditions, when the VA added new presumptive conditions in the past, there was a ruling that said, hey, if you've previously filed for that condition, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go back to the date that you originally filed it and were denied. Okay? That is how it used to be. When they added these, there is no NEMR, or NAMER, however you want to pronounce it. There is no rule that's going to take you back to, which was a court, basically it was a court challenge, right? And so that court challenge, they went back and presumptively, retroactively took those presumptions back to whenever you were originally denied. They are not doing that for the PACT Act. What does that mean? Well, it probably means there's going to be a legal challenge down the road to this, right? And try to get it for people that filed for these things previously. But as of right now, the earliest effective date is going to be August of 2022. I think it's August 10th when the PACT Act was signed into law. So you have until August 10th, 2023 to file that claim, to have it hopefully go retroactive back to the date of that, passing of that law, okay? Now, that being said, the criteria. So this was this is the old criteria, right? So this is where a lot of the issues were, perimeter duty, right? Like in Thailand. And then of course they added the blue water, so within 12 nautical miles, right? And then you have brown water, that's been part of it. The Korean DMZ, which a lot of the times the missile operators, were in that DMZ from this time period. They could file for those presumptions as well. And of course, boots on the ground, right? If you were assigned a unit location where C-123 aircraft had traces of Agent Orange used to transport or spray Agent Orange, they can also get the presumption. Testing or storing if you're involved in it. And then, of course, certain reserve time frames, which I believe is places where they stored it, right? That's why they had those there as well. So this is what the PACT Act added. If you were at any of these bases, so basically they took away the criteria that you had to be on or at the base perimeter in Thailand bases, right? They were only granting them if you worked security police or if you could prove that your duties put you on and near that base perimeter, which we filed claims a lot of times that, argued the fact that, a lot of the duties put everybody near the base perimeter. They walked in and out of the gate, what have you, but they were pretty strict in their interpretation on who would get the presumption. Now, doesn't matter. If you were at one of these bases, you get the presumptions. And then they added Laos, Cambodia, Guam or American Samoa, and then Johnson Atoll, 72 to 77. Okay, so these will also qualify for health care access. So if you were at these places, you can also apply for VA health care. We'll kind of go into VA health care in a little bit later slides. Just because it really, the PACT Act has an effect on eligibility for health care, so some of the eligibility criteria has changed. So new locations added for health care access. So these places, if you serve during these time frames, you can also apply for VA health care, right? So a lot of people don't know there is criteria to enroll in VA health care, and like I said, we'll go through that in a little bit. But these new locations have been added to that if you serve there, you can apply for VA health care. Gulf War. So, the Gulf War presumptives, there's quite a few of them. And I believe, let's see. See, I had a mistake. I can see it right there. Oop, but it has to do with Agent Orange exposure, which isn't relevant here. So these are some of the presumptive conditions with the different areas. Southwest Asia, these are all considered presumptive. The undiagnosed illness, really what it's supposed to say here is diagnosed within 1 year of leaving the theater that you were in, right? So West Nile and Shigella and some of these are all for, they have to be diagnosed within a year from Afghanistan. And then undiagnosed illness for Gulf War veterans, it's really going to be something that you've continuously had and continuously are fighting symptoms that really they haven't been able to pinpoint and put a diagnosis to. And if you have a continuity of those issues and you've sought treatment and they really can't, they might just tell you like they've told others, it's all in your head, right? So, but the issue becomes that is something that can be filed for with proper evidence, right? So with the VA, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove, right? So it's all evidence-based. But so that's one of them that, even though it's considered presumptive, it is pretty vague, right, really, on what undiagnosed illness is. So these locations are all added for the PACT Act, right? So if you veterans served, post 9/11 or after the, or during and after the Gulf War in these places here, right? If you serve there, these are now considered locations that the PACT Act added, so you can apply for health care and or file for presumptive conditions related to certain exposures. A big one, obviously, is that they added was hopefully we'll see the entire list. So these presumptives were all added due to the exposures from basically post 9/11, and Gulf War as well, right? So these are all just the cancer presumptives. Okay. This is important because there have been veterans in the past that may have passed from one of these issues, and the surviving spouse was denied benefits. They need to reapply, obviously, for those benefits, right? So it opens up not just for veterans, but surviving spouses are also eligible for benefits that they may have been previously denied, okay? So it's something important that I think people need to understand, that getting the word out there and having people understand that surviving spouses that were previously denied, and they may get a letter in the mail, or they may have moved, and the VA's not been able to hunt them down. So it's something that they need to know. So if you know anybody, a surviving spouse, you can have them call a VSO or the VA or an organization that works with VA claims in order to see if they may refile that or qualify for any of those benefits. So these are illnesses added by the PACT Act. So as you can see, COPD, the chronic rhinitis and sinusitis, chronic bronchitis, and asthma. So even if it's diagnosed after service, asthma, just a lot of breathing issues, obviously, lung issues. So there's a lot of things that they added, a lot of illnesses and a lot of cancers. So, and most of them are, unfortunately, Gulf War and post 9/11, right? So, but something to keep in mind that a lot of these, someone may have some of these or had them and never filed because they weren't presumptive or they couldn't prove or they were denied previously. So it's important to know what conditions are now considered with that presumptive label. So I'm going into Camp Lejeune water because it's also an important part of toxic. It kind of came out before the PACT Act. It's not necessarily a PACT Act, but it's worth mentioning. Because I'm sure everyone has seen the commercials, right? I wake up in the morning thinking I may be entitled to compensation. Yes, exactly. So the requirements for the contaminated water, being at New River, Camp Lejeune, 53 through 87, you have to have that. That's key. 30 cumulative days. So in total, 30 days or more. Okay? And of course, not a dishonorable discharge. And you have to be diagnosed with one or more of the following conditions. And these are the conditions that they associate with the contaminated water. So there's quite a few of those as well. The myelodysplastic syndromes, that's something, and aplastic anemia. These are something that if you talk to the doctor, they can say, yes, this is considered a myelodysplastic syndrome. And all the a lot of these are obviously some that would be very serious, very bad conditions associated with that contaminated drinking water, right? So any of these that someone had, or if a veteran passed away from one of these, then the surviving spouse should be able to file a claim for what we call dependent indemnity compensation. Eligibility for survivor's benefits, and the reason why I'm talking about survivor's benefits on these as well is because the PACT Act has changed so many things that the eligibility for some of the benefits have also changed, right? So survivor's benefits, but in order to file for survivor's benefits, I'm talking specifically on this one, it's mostly DIC that I'm talking about, the DIC claim, okay? Because there's other survivor's benefits as well, non-service connected pension, but that's a discussion for a different day. The eligibility, one of these must be true. You live with a veteran or service member without a break until their death, or if you were separated, you weren't at fault for the separation. Well, that shouldn't be hard to prove, ladies, am I right? No fault of your own. All right. And one of these must be true. You married the veteran or service member within 15 years of their discharge from the period of military service during which the qualifying illness or injury started or got worse. Or, I always say the VA regs have more oars than a Viking ship. Or you were married to the veteran or service member for at least 1 year, or you had a child with a veteran or service member, right? But these also have to be true with the first slide, so living up to them up to the time of their death. But if you're remarried, you can continue to receive compensation if one of these described you. You were remarried on or after December 16, 2003, and you were 57 years of age or older at the time you married, or you remarried on or after January 5th, 2021, and you were 55 years of age or older at the time you remarried. So you could still qualify for benefits if you're remarried if one of those two apply, right? So, evidence. So for the DIC, for the evidence portion, right, one of these has to be true. The service member died while on active duty for training, or inactive duty training, or the veteran died from a service-connected illness or injury, or the veteran didn't die from a service-connected illness or injury but was eligible to receive VA compensation for a service-connected disability rated as totally disabling for a certain period of time, right? So if the thing with DIC also is it's going to depend, right? Because adding hypertension for the Vietnam veterans to the presumptive list, right, is huge if it's listed on a death certificate as one of the reasons or major contributing factors contributing to the veteran's death. If it's listed on there, then, you know, that's a valid claim now if they served in Vietnam, right? Or if they served in Thailand, right? Or any of those other areas where that hypertension is presumptive, right? So it opens up those benefits to, and could go back, you know, who knows how long ago that veteran passed. The spouse can still file that claim. Now, it's still got to be, the evidence still has to show on the death certificate, or it's going to have to show as either, like I said, the major contributing cause or a significant contributing factor on that death certificate. And like I said, you can always try and file a claim if that's not the case, but the VA is going to base it on evidence. But if it doesn't matter if they deny you still have due process. So if you can continue to gather evidence, you know, I'm in the process right now. I've worked with people to try and get death certificates amended. It's easier when you're close to the time of the person's passing to get something added, but as time goes by, you know, obviously, because it has to go through the state, it's a process, right? So there may be other ways to show that it was a contributing factor. If the veteran's eligibility was due to a rating of totally disabling, they have had to have this rating for 10 years before their death. If a veteran is rated at 100%, permanent and total, or 100% TDIU even, for 10 years or more, because it's still considered a permanent a disability, that they can file for DI, or it should be automatic. If they report the veteran is deceased and they've been at 100% for 10 years or more, it should be automatic. The VA is going to start that process of granting that DIC benefit without ever filing a claim. It's supposed to work that way. Does it always? Not really, but that's the way it's supposed to work. Or since they're released from active duty and for at least 5 years immediately before their death, right? So if they're pretty close to, so if they got 100% since the release of active duty and for at least 5 years immediately before their death, so from active duty to their time of death had to be at least 5 years basically if they were granted 100% rate out of service. Or for at least 1 year before their death if they were a former POW who died after September 30th, 1999. And totally disabling, as per the VA, that note means the veteran's injuries made it impossible for them to work, which I don't know, you know, they have that on their website, but that's kind of, I don't know how hard they would look at that when they see 100% permanent total. It's 100% permanent total, right? So this is the VA benefits phone number, okay? If you're thinking about filing a claim, you can always call them, right, and say you want to file an intent to file a claim for disability. That will just start the clock. You have a year to file that claim. If you decide I'm not going to file a claim, it's no harm, no foul. It will drop off, and that's that. But then that still gives you a year to gather evidence, and it would go retroactively back to the date that you filed that intent to file. So how that works is they start the claim the month after they received the intent to file. So if you filed, it's February now, March 1st through March 31st would be the first month you'd be eligible to receive benefits, and that would be payable April 1st because they pay, you know, a month in arrears. So, or you could call me and we could sit down and we could file, you know, talk about it and file an intent to file, or talk about it and file a claim that day, depending on what the circumstances are. Healthcare enrollment. So I get a lot of questions, I get a lot of calls. People call me and saying, you know, hey, I'm a veteran, I need hearing aids. And I ask them, are you enrolled in VA healthcare? And then they may say, no, I'm not enrolled in VA healthcare. Well, veterans can apply for VA healthcare, but they're not necessarily going to accept them into VA healthcare because there's certain criteria that has to happen. Just being a veteran isn't enough, because if you don't have one of the eligibility criteria and you are in over resources as far as the yearly income guidelines, then they'll say, well, you're not, you know, you're over resources for this, and they say something like, well, you're in priority group 8, which basically means that you're not covered in this. But I always tell veterans, hey, if you have an emergency and you have nowhere else to go, you take your DD-214, you go down to the VA emergency room, they'll see you. They saw me before I was enrolled, so. And then once you do that, they may still bill you for a portion of that, but they'll see you. Okay, so eligibility. If you enlisted after September 7th, 1980, or entered active duty after October 16th, 1981, you must have served 24 continuous months or the full period for which you were called to active duty, unless any of the following are true. It doesn't apply if you were discharged for a disability that was caused or made worse by your active duty service, or you were discharged for a hardship or early out, or you served prior to September 7th, 1980. If you're a current or former member of the Reserves or National Guard, you must have been called to active duty by a federal order and completed the full period for which you were called or ordered to active duty. If you had or have active duty status for training purposes only, you do not qualify for VA healthcare. So the VA looks at active duty for other than training as active duty. So unless, of course, you were injured during that time, injured during training, where there is a LOD or line of duty determination, and what the VA can do then is look at all the evidence and say, okay, we're going to make this period an active duty period. So even though you were never called up, they're going to say, okay, for VA purposes, this was active duty. And it might just say you were active for 1 day. But it doesn't matter, because now that condition is can be used, or that period of service can be used. So basically that would come into play if you were filing a disability claim, right, the LOD. But that would also qualify you for VA healthcare at that point if you get if you're able to get a disability, even if it's at 0%. They're obligated to take care of the service-connected disabilities, so therefore they would put you in VA healthcare into one of the priority groups, probably down the list if you're at 0%, but still in VA healthcare. So there's a lot of stuff here. But if I'm eligible, at least one of these things have to be true, right? If you receive financial compensation payments for a service-connected disability, they'll take you in. If you were discharged for a disability resulting from something that happened to you in line of duty, or you were discharged for a disability that got worse, which is aggravation. So you had the issue, they gave you a waiver, it got worse, you proved it was aggravated by service, you know, then that is considered an aggravated disability and you could qualify there. You're a combat veteran, discharge or release on or after September 11th, 2001, okay? Don't ask me why they just use that date. Learn more about eligibility or for transitioning and returning members of combat veterans. Oh, this was a link that talks about. So I believe if you're recently discharged, there's 1 year of VA healthcare. If you're a combat veteran, you get 5 years, unless that has changed. But that is how it has been in the past, which still gives you plenty of time to file for any service-connected disabilities you may have and get you in the VA healthcare system through that. If you get a VA pension, then you meet the, which means that it's a needs-based benefit. The pensions are needs-based, means-tested, means your income is at a certain level, and below that level you qualify for some or all of that, that amount of that maximum allowable pension rate. And again, pensions are an involved topic that we discuss when I talk about when I do the talks about the claims process. I go into a little more depth on those types of pensions and survivors' pensions as well. But those are needs-based benefits. So if you meet that income guideline, then you qualify for health care because you're getting the pension, you meet the guidelines. You're a former POW, you got a Purple Heart, Medal of Honor. If you get Medicaid benefits or qualify for Medicaid, if you served in Southwest Asia during the Gulf between 90 and 98, or 30 days at Camp Lejeune between August 1st, 53 and December 31st, 87, which are the dates for that they look at for contaminated water. I'm sorry, can you see okay? Or you must have served any of the following locations during the Vietnam era. And of course, this is the expansion of the PACT Act, which is expanding the areas that you served that now allows you to apply for VA health care, right? So it used to be boots on the ground in Vietnam. Then it turned, them 12 miles outside for Blue Water Navy. Now any of the Royal Thai Air Force bases between 62 and 76, or Laos between 65 and 69, Cambodia in like the second half of April there in 69, Guam or American Samoa or the territorial waters off Guam from 62 to 80. So this, as you can see, Johnson Atoll, Republic of Vietnam, obviously 62 to 75. So this opens up a lot more areas that make eligibility for VA health care that were not previously eligible. So you can see why they talk about this as the biggest expansion in the VA for health care and for benefits that they've had. And it's opened up a lot of different, and it's long overdue. We all know that, but it's a step in the right direction. And hopefully, hopefully, and so the other thing is we talked about earlier, so the toxic screenings, the registries, those are important. And why they're important is the VA will look at those and they're going to see from those registries what types of clusters of disease and issues veterans are having, and then they can do studies based on those. So it's important to get into the registries if you want to help veterans to get benefits later on and expand the presumptive conditions, because they need the data, quite frankly, and they need to know that the conditions that the cluster of people that served in a certain area are getting, what maybe that may be a red flag to say, okay, we need to do another study here and find out why these people that served in this particular area are getting these particular conditions, right? So the registry is good, the toxic screening is good for those purposes for sure. So I think that they're very important. Now, if none of this applies to you, you may still qualify based on income like we talked about, right? So the income has to be below whatever the threshold that they set for a certain area. Don't quote me, but I think for this area with a one dependent is around $50,000, maybe $54,000 a year. If you're below that, then you can apply for VA healthcare, and but you can apply at any time. They're just going to come back and let you know, yay or nay, that you qualify for it. But when it comes to, like I talked about earlier, someone that's saying, hey, they want to get hearing aids, if you're not in VA healthcare, you're not going to get hearing aids. Or if you don't have a service-connected disability directly related, which means you're eligible for VA healthcare, right? So a service-connected disability, even for hearing, obviously would allow you to be able to get into that system, VA healthcare system, and be eligible for hearing aids and other care, of course. So the VA healthcare phone number, right? So this is the national line for VA healthcare, right? So even if someone has a service-connected disability and they never got into the VA healthcare system, because if you just said, well, I'm good, I got my own health care, circumstances change. As we get older, circumstances change, and the type of health care you have may not address certain things, right? They may not provide any in-home care, right? Whereas if you're in the VA healthcare system and your VA social worker says, hey, we can, based on all this, yes, we think that you have the qualifications to qualify for 8 hours of care a month. Doesn't sound like a lot, but every little bit helps when circumstances change. So the only thing you have to do when you're in VA healthcare is to be seen at very minimum once every 2 years to stay enrolled and stay active in VA healthcare. And if they're providing you prescriptions, then you have to go at least once a year. And that once a year is just for a physical blood work, just to make sure that they can keep your prescriptions up to date and make sure that they're providing those prescriptions for you. So if you've never been in VA healthcare, you can call that number and just say, hey, I have a service-connected disability. I never used it. Am I eligible? And they'll look you up and say, well, yeah, you're eligible. And you'll say, okay, good. Can you transfer me to either, so for me personally, I go to Golden, the community-based outpatient clinic for care, or you can go out to Aurora to the Rocky Mountain Regional, right? And you just tell them, can you transfer me to whichever one you want to go to so I can set up an appointment and establish care in that VA healthcare system and get a primary care doctor set up. And then once they verify your information, they can transfer you, and you can set that up and get that primary care doctor, set that appointment, and you're good to go. If you have been in it in the past and it's just been a long time and you haven't dealt with it, you can still call that number and say, I was in it. I don't know, am I still in it? And they'll look and say, well, yeah, you're inactive. And they should be able to reactivate that on their end or give you information on what you need to fill out in order to get that done. But they should be able to do it really quick on the phone. And then they can transfer you to set up that primary care doctor. Because you need a primary care doctor in the VA healthcare system. Whenever you get in the VA healthcare system, they have what they call a PACT team, Patient Aligned Care Team. That patient aligned care team consists of your doctors, nurses, and a social worker. Those social workers, they are a great resource there because they can work with the doctor to make sure that you're getting the level of care that you should be getting. So whenever you enroll in VA healthcare, usually they'll send you a packet, that handbook. That handbook is usually personalized for you. It will, if you read through it, it's going to have your personal information in that handbook. So if you read through it, it's going to tell you, you know, everything that you need to know as far as your eligibility of what priority group you're in, if you have co-pays, what your co-pays are, prescription costs, all that usually is in that handbook, right? So if you get that handbook and you just throw it out, you're throwing away some personal information in that handbook. You really look through it, it is tailored to you. The other thing is when you go to that appointment, they should give you a list of your PACT team, who's your social worker, those phone numbers. Those are all important. You just put that away with your medical stuff so that you got a point of contact if you need to contact that social worker, right? The other thing is for those that have that are tech savvy, have internet access, My Healthy Vet is a website that is really good. You can direct message your doctor. You can reorder prescriptions through that site. You can, if you've signed the release and you have the premium account, you can look it through all your health records and download them and look through all your VA health records. So there's a lot you can do with the technology, right, that VA is going to. So My Healthy Vet is a great resource if you're in VA healthcare. And there used to be, and I can't find it now, I think maybe they took it away, but in that My Healthy Vet, there was a place where you could actually download that personalized handbook I was talking about. But I haven't seen it. I was having trouble finding it, so unless they moved it somewhere else, I don't know if they just took it down or not. But you were able to download it and then, you know, have it on your computer or print it out, and you would have that, you know, all that information. So that is VA healthcare. And that's pretty much that. I know it's a lot of information, so, and I know nobody has any questions. Oh, there's one.
Tim, maybe I just missed it, but with all the attention, you know, in recent years on PTSD impact and, you know, veteran suicides and stuff, I didn't hear you mention how does that...
Well, it's not really part of the PACT Act. So the VA really, they've opened up VA healthcare or access. So how it's supposed to work is if you are suicidal, you should be able to call anywhere and let them know that you're a veteran. It doesn't matter if it's in the VA system or not. And they are supposed to see you, and the VA is supposed to take care of that. So when it comes to, and that's not really part of the PACT Act, that's something that came out kind of separate. But when it comes to veteran suicide, obviously we know this is a big deal. And there's a lot of organizations out there doing a lot of good. The main thing is to, you know, if you are feeling or you know someone that is dealing with, you know, those thoughts of suicide, hey, you know, it doesn't hurt to ask someone the question point blank, are you thinking of hurting yourself? You know, is there something, you know, do you want to talk? Do you want to sit down and talk? Do you want to meet for coffee? You know, what can we do, you know, to try and get someone to talk and try and, because statistics show that if you do talk about it and ask someone, you know, they're likely to talk about it. They're likely to be willing to, you know, to discuss it, and hopefully it once that thought dissipates, it takes them away from wanting to commit that act, right? So having that conversation and talking specifically, there's organizations out there. There's one in Colorado. Oh man, I forget what the name of it is, but they, you know, it's basically a buddy check, you know, where they'll get on. You know, someone will call, someone will talk to you. You know, you can get on and speak, and so it's a major issue. The VA is addressing it, but you should be able to go anywhere and let them know, hey, you're a veteran. You're distraught. The VA healthcare system and the other thing is the vet centers too are underutilized, right? So I really think that they're an important part of the puzzle to call a vet center, because a lot of times people had a bad experience with the VA and they don't really want to go there, right? So there's vet centers, there's other options available.
Maybe we could get you back sometime to talk about that.
Yeah, I could put something together and really go about all that. He was ready.
One of the things when it comes to asking about suicide is by asking the question, they're not going to actually put that thought in their mind. I'm a clinical therapist at the VA.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
that's one of the things that people get really scared about. Is like, well, if I bring it up, it's actually going to put that
right.
thought in their mind, they're going to get through it.
Right.
The other thing, what you're talking about with if somebody gets hospitalized as a veteran, after January 17, 2023, the VA now pays for that hospitalization and for a certain number of months of care after that as well for mental health care.
Right, and so correct me if I'm wrong, though, but they can go anywhere right now. That, I mean, it doesn't have to be in the VA system at all. So that was fairly recent, you said, right?
January 17th.
January 17th. So that's really new, right? So, but it's like I said, they're making strides in the right direction. I think the VA has really come a long way, you know. And what I tell people, because they have bad experience with the VA at one time, most of the people that work there are veterans. They're not there to, you know, because there's still this mentality, you know, deny till you die. It's not that way. You know, the evidence, if you give them the evidence, they're more than happy to grant that claim. But you have to have the evidence. Yes?
So thank you for this information, Tim. This is really helpful.
You bet.
I'm a school certified official at C. Boulder, so I work on the education side of things.
Sure.
I work with a lot of young veterans that served in Afghanistan in the past 10 years. Is there anything that they can do to be proactive about future coverage, or is this mostly a reactionary sort of thing?
Well, so I would say that you know, the first things they could do if a veteran was in Afghanistan, and if they have anything they feel is related to service, they should file a claim. Okay. They shouldn't wait, right? Because the only thing the VA could do is say no, right? Maybe that they feel, okay, this isn't considered a disability at this time, right? But that doesn't mean that it won't be, right? Or because it has to be considered chronic, right? The VA needs it to be a chronic condition. So, but they've also redefined some of the things that chronic is, right? So pain with motion is now considered, right? So someone that has knee issues that has pain with motion with that's considered a disability, right? So where they were denying that in the past, they have to recognize that, okay, but to your point that you have a year from the time of discharge to file a claim that will go back to your discharge date, okay? The further you get away from discharge, right, you need continuity of care, right, that the VA is looking for to show that it was related to service, or continuity of symptoms, right? So one of the things I come across a lot is someone that, you know, they may have been out of service 20 years and they're like, well, you know, I have a back condition. Okay, well, when did it start? Well, you know, we filed a claim and all the records show that they never made complaints till they were out 20 years later, you know. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't bugging them, right? That doesn't mean that they had issues with their back and they were taking ibuprofen until it got to the point where hey, they had to go be seen. They had to find out what was going on. They had to go to a chiropractor, acupuncturist, whatever. So that time in between the time that they were discharged and the time that they were initially seen, that 20-year period, that doesn't mean that they didn't have the issue or it's not related to service. It just means that the gap between that continuity of care, but if there was still continuity of symptoms, that can be, you know, that can be addressed in a statement, right? But I would say that if someone got out and they think they have any disability, they should file for it. Or if they were a recently discharged, say they're a combat veteran and it's within that 5-year period and they didn't enroll in VA healthcare, they should. You know, I try to get everyone enrolled in VA healthcare. That's an important thing, I think, that people look at and get into. I mean, there's going to be stories and there's always going to be issues. You know, I have them myself, sometimes issues with, but it's just part of the massive size of the of the system, and sometimes things fall through the cracks. But that's not going to keep me from getting on the phone and making sure that, hey, you know, it's my care, and I'm going to be directly involved in it, and I'm going to take ownership of that, and let them know, hey, it's my, you know, I've called you 3 times on this, right? We need to get this rectified. So getting enrolled in VA healthcare is important. Filing disabilities is important. So this is going to be here. This isn't, something that's going to be, 5 years down the line, they're going to, take it away. So if one of these things pop up, a lot of times someone has allergic rhinitis or sinusitis, something like that. Well, that's a claim. If it's chronic, that's a disability benefit. It may come back at 0%, but it's still service connected. So if it gets worse, you can always file for an increase due to the nature of the disability worsening, right? So once you're service connected, that's 3/4 of the battle right there. Because once you have that service connection, now you're eligible for VA health care, right? And now you're, they're obligated to take care of those, so 0%, you may have, few symptoms, or you just may have, because allergic rhinitis and sinusitis is two of the ones that may come back at 0 quite often, but it's still something that if you have it, you need to file for. Same thing with hypertension. So the Vietnam veterans file for hypertension. It may come back at 0, but it still has important, ramifications down the road, right? So, yeah, did that kind of answer your question? They shouldn't wait, is what I'm saying. They should enroll in VA healthcare if they're eligible. And a lot of times they're like, I don't want nothing to do with it. I get that. I totally do. But things change. Circumstances change.
Right. Unfortunately, most of them have, which is...
Yeah, which is good. And I would always encourage that. I would encourage them, in Boulder, they have the Boulder Vet Center, and then I think one day a month, because the Boulder VSO is in Longmont, but I believe they go to the Boulder Vet Center one day a month, and so they could meet with them right at the Boulder Vet Center on which days they were there. So I'm not sure which days they're there. I think it's maybe the 3rd Monday, but yeah. I hope that answered your question. Okay.
Any other questions?
I just have one quick question.
Yeah.
Is that the adjusted gross income or your actual income?
For the healthcare?
Yes.
So I think that's going to be gross income.
Okay.
Pretty sure they always look at gross for everything. So, yes.
Yeah, just a question, or just something just to bring up.
Yes.
Chiropractors came up in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I would suggest that if anybody in your family or somebody you know is thinking about going to a chiropractor for a service-connected condition that has not been claimed, either ask that chiropractor to do an x-ray if he's set up for that, or get an x-ray of your back or whatever it is that you think is service-connected. Because if you can't prove it, they're not going to take a chiropractor.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, and that's my predecessor right there. Taught me everything I know. Hey, Frank. Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point, though. If you are being seen outside of the VA healthcare system, make sure you have the evidence to show the VA what they're going to need, because sometimes someone might claim that the back is causing the radiculopathy down the legs, or the cervical spine is causing it down the arms, and then the VA looks and says, well, it doesn't look on the x-ray like there's any nerve root compression, and they deny it. Well, you can't really tell that without an MRI a lot of times, so there's always due process, but you definitely want to have the evidence moving forward that you have you meet the criteria of a service-connected disability, right? So if you're outside the VA healthcare system, you want to gather up all those documents that you have outside the VA healthcare system when you're getting ready to file a claim. And here's why. If you don't, the VA is going to say, oh, we'll go after them for you. So here's this form to fill out. Well, if the VA goes after them and they get all this documentation, there may be something in there they can use to say, you fell off a ladder back, back here, and it could be related to that. Because you went to the doctor because you fell off a step stool, right? So even though the condition existed prior to that, right? But it gives them a way to look at it. So because when the doctors review all that, because they have to make an opinion. When you go to do those, we talked about those compensation and pension exams. The important thing to note is those do three things. They verify that you have that disability that you're claiming, right? They'll look at how that condition affects you or how bad it is based on the rating criteria. But then the doctor will make an opinion. Is this condition, based on all the evidence, at least as likely as not related to service? And so that's the whole evidentiary criteria with the VA is 50-50. So, that being said, if you need a doctor's opinion, a lot of times doctors don't want to write those because right away they think, oh no, liability. This is a liability. If they understand that we're not looking for medical certainty, we're only looking for at least as likely as not, then they're more apt to say, oh, okay, I can write something because to me it is at least as likely as not that your exposure to jet engines on an aircraft carrier contributed to the level of hearing loss you have today. Or shooting that 50 cal or being around artillery, whatever it is, right? So sometimes you have to go out and seek your own opinions, in order to get things service connected, because that doctor that you went to the C&P exam, you're meeting with that doctor for what? An hour? And they're looking at the evidence that's provided. And one thing that they don't like to do is to take your statements into consideration, which they're supposed to, or buddy statements, which they're supposed to, which opens up, some room for, to appeal or a higher level review based on that they didn't take all the evidence into consideration. But going out and get your own doctor's opinion is important, I think, if you're trying to get a service connection, instead of banging your head on the wall of the VA system and keep trying to reopen it and keep getting the same result, which happens a lot. Yes, sir.
Just a quick one. If a veteran has been denied access to VA health care because of income level, do any of these entry points reestablish them? Do you have, they have a particular combat area at a certain point?
Oh, yeah. If they meet the new criteria, they can reapply based on that, or they can reapply the following year when their income changes.
Will their income level continue to keep them out, is my question.
No.
Okay.
But the income, they still will check income with the IRS, so that will tell them what priority group to put you in based on your income. Because if your income is higher than the threshold, but you still meet the VA health care due to one of the places that you served, it still can affect your copays. So that's why they do the check. They used to have you file a form every year saying, okay, an income verification. Well, now they just yank the IRS tax reports and see what you're filing, and verify it that way, so that you don't have to fill out those reports every year anymore. So they changed that a little bit, but yeah, if you meet the new criteria, they won't deny you. They'll say, okay, you're in healthcare, but you're at this priority group based on your income.
You might be in category 8, but at least you'll be in, right?
Yes, I would say category 7. Because category 8 is basically saying that's where they put all the non-desirables. I was in category 8 for a while.
Term, is that in the, never mind.
Well, that's what my wife calls me. So. I just thought I'd use that. Oh, she's still watching? Hi, honey. I'm just kidding. I love you. Oh, she shocked me again. So, is there any other questions that anyone has?
Yes, right here.
Yes.
The income, is that based on, say, my income or a household?
Household.
Income with my wife?
Household, yep.
Okay.
Yeah, they look at household income. All great questions, for sure. And I didn't even have to refer to my handy-dandy cheat sheet. Yeah, book. Great book, by the way, and anyone can order one. It's what every veteran should know.
Well, anyway, but Tim, thank you very much for joining us, as always.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We do try and get Tim back here periodically, particularly whenever you say you have something new to share with us. And I would like to do the next one with you, sir, back there, to tell us some more about what we can do to help our veterans, who are having other problems, not just medical.
Absolutely.
So